Ready?
3, 2, 1, rock.
Around Cottonwood, Alabama, people tell the legend of Old Joe. Old Joe Christmas, to be exact. Old Joe was native by blood. His family claimed Cherokee, but rumors circulated the town that they descended from Seminole, or perhaps Apache, more savage tribes in the cultural lexicon. Old Joe's ancestors saved their progeny, the gossip went, thanks to claiming the civilized blood of the Cherokee, adopting the missionaries' religion, and taking the family name, Christmas. How much more civilized can an Indian get, the old-timers would say. Joe grew up like many American boys, playing games, chasing girls, and dreaming of being a hero. 8 hours a day in a classroom grinded his sense of wonder, especially when the sun was high and the birds sang. Old Joe preferred to be outside playing cowboys and Indians, where he was, of course, the Indian. You see, deep down in his gut, or maybe it was in his heart, he dug to touch his ancient roots, the way of the earth. After 3 tours through the jungles of Vietnam, Old Joe returned to Cottonwood, married his high school sweetheart, and hammered out a comfortable life. Each morning, he sat in the same chair at Maggie's diner, where Stella served a bottomless coffee cup. He offered attentive ears, healing words, and welcoming smiles to those in need. To Old Joe, no one was a stranger. But on a warm day one early spring, something changed in Old Joe. No one really knows what happened that day. Some suspect he lost hope. Others say that he lost his mind. Some even say that it was just the day that he remembered himself. But after that day, Old Joe was not the same. Sure, he still sat in his chair each day at Maggie's, but coffee consumption decreased and his demeanor changed. Fire burned in his saucer eyes. A contemptuous look stretched across his face, like he knew something that everyone else forgot. Instead of big-toothed grins and gentle words, he offered primal growls and apocalyptic warnings. Old Joe cursed the white man's technology for creating destruction. He lamented how silly Americans can't even go 7 minutes without mentioning a brand name. He pointed to the congregated townsfolk, tapping on their tiny screens, unable to share simple words. He rambled about the technological race to madness, how it separated the people from their families and friends and neighbors, about how selfishness and greed tore the cultural fabric, leaving people with a misunderstanding of the good, little experience with honor, and no sense of community. He said, case in point, after they sheepishly hid their devices to avoid his glare, and then stared in silence at one another. Disconnect from that virtual world long enough and words will return to you, he assured them. And then he immediately referred to a book entitled 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television, which he connected to the apathy and automation associated with office jobs, which he piggybacked with genetic modification and how it ushered the death of the human species. The cascades crashed with a statement about how power in the hands of the few would surely destroy the many. Whispers filled Cottonwood. Old Joe has gone off the deep end, they said. Adults who once enjoyed seeing Joe about town crossed the street to avoid him. Children who once laughed at his silly faces cried when they sensed his angst. Instead, the people glared as he paced the streets, mumbling to himself about the world as constructed. One day, Joe appeared at Maggie's, dressed like a man from the history books, or more accurately, as the story goes, a creature from some ridiculous Indian tale. He wore buckskin pants and shirt. Moccasins covered his feet. A coyote hide draped over his shoulders, the neck and face pulled over his head, the snout pointing out just above his third eye. Around his head, a red band with 3 hawk feathers perched on it. One pointed to high noon, the other 2 pointed due left and due right, respectively. Without a word, he crouched to the edge of his chair, downed a single cup of coffee, and pushed 3/4 towards Stella. She responded, "On the house today, sugar," with a worried forehead, and pushed the coins back to him. He broke his silence. "Thank you, Stella. You've always been kind to me." Old Joe stood up, shuffled towards the exit, all eyes pasted on his strides. But he stopped short of the door and turned to address Maggie's customers. "I've spent my entire life here in Cottonwood, watched the changes move through like the seasons. I've seen the simple life grow more complicated. I've witnessed shiny objects separate us from each other, make loneliness more barbaric, and killing more efficient. I've seen respect for others decline in the race to destroy the earth. No more will I stand by, like my people did then. The soft look in his eyes and gentle demeanor returned. He bowed to those gathered at Maggie's and pushed the door open with one hand. But before he crossed the threshold, he made one final announcement. Now I hear the call of the wild. With that, old Joe exited Maggie's and sauntered down the sidewalk, whistling Amazing Grace. He nodded to the townsfolk, who stared as he continued down the street, past the western end of the downtown district. The last confirmed sighting of old Joe, he was headed for the forest outside of town, and no one ever saw him again. Some people have claimed to have seen him, but never could they provide proof. Only excuses like, "It was too dark," or "My camera wouldn't focus, but I swear it was him." But the people of Cottonwood, Alabama, even the youngest generation, know the legend of old Joe. They say that he still walks the forest to this day. And sometimes, in the night, when the moon hangs low, when the dreams are swirling and the shadows creep, you can hear old Joe out in the wilderness. Ow! And they perk up their ears and wake up in their dreams and say to themselves, now we hear the call of the wild.